Good morning. And welcome to this historical moment where we witness in our midst an internationally renowned author who has certainly impacted the work of my office. We all read his work stamped from the beginning as a team, How to Be an Anti-Racist also. So we are steeped in this work, but now we want to introduce him to you. But before we get started into the biography of Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, I'd like to welcome our partner, Mr. Chichi, to the stage on behalf of KeyBank, to bring his welcome. Thank you.
Good morning. Yes. I just want to start by saying how proud KeyBank is to sponsor this event that has brought Dr. Ibram X. Kendi to Buffalo again. Dr. Kendi, welcome to our city. We are so glad that you are here. Thank you so much. To all the students here with us today and those watching online, welcome. We hope you will listen and learn from Dr. Kendi. He is one of the world's foremost historians and leading anti-racist scholars, and he's bringing a valuable and important message to our community today. Please listen and learn and lean into his words, and if you haven't already, pick up and read many of his books and publications. His message is relevant and crucial as we continue to do the work of building a more inclusive and an anti-racist society where we can all live together in harmony. Our support of this event is part of KeyBank's commitment to diversity and inclusion. We value diversity, we are committed to the equity, and we will continue to work on fostering the inclusion throughout our business. From the teammates we hire and the clients we serve, to the suppliers we use and the communities that welcome all of us. Every teammate is engaged with and is committed to our goals. Our support of this event aligns with our purpose, which is to help the communities that we serve thrive. Since 2017, KeyBank has followed through on the community commitments totaling more than $1 billion in the Buffalo market. These investments are helping to increase financial access, wellness, and equity for low to moderate income individuals and communities. Specifically, we are focusing on efforts on supporting affordable housing and community development projects, small business lending, home lending, and transformative philanthropy. Thank you again for being here. Please enjoy and learn from Dr. Kendi's words today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chichi, for your partnership and your support. I would also like to introduce our other partner from Talking Leaves Book Company, Mr. Welch, who, without him, this could not have been possible. So he will just share brief words at this time. Mr. Welch?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I need to thank KeyBank's Foundation and Dr. Morell for their help with this, but I want to tell you that we were approached by the publisher of this book a few months ago asking us if we would be willing to host an event with him, and they suggested it had to be a large event with a lot of people and that it had to be in the evening. And my sense was that this book was a book for young readers, and that getting a lot of young readers out at 7 or 8 o'clock at night to sit down for an hour or more to listen to an author was not really the ideal setting for this book. So I came up with an idea with some of my staff that we approach the school system and local foundations to see if we could get some money together to purchase the books and then bring Dr. Kendi in front of in front of you, in front of a group of students, the intended audience for this book. So through a lot of work, we were able to sort of make that happen, and KeyBank and Dr. Morell were key players in making it happen, so I want to thank them. When we started Talking Leaves nearly 50 years ago, with a vision and a commitment to make the histories and stories of historically marginalized people visible and available. We were excited when the publisher approached us with the idea of hosting a launch for this book, the idea of bringing a living historian whose work makes history come alive in front of a group of young readers, a history that today is being challenged, erased, and denied in many places. As longtime Buffalo booksellers, we also knew well the challenges that many families face in affording books for their children, so we sought financial support to be able to provide a quantity of free books for distribution to make Dr. Kendi's visit even more memorable. So you are all being given today, through the courtesy of the bank and the bookstore and Dr. Morell, a copy of this book. It has already been signed by Dr. Kendi. And it is our hope that this book and the talk that you're going to hear, the conversation between these two distinguished folks, will inspire you to sort of dig deeper into the history of this country and the various communities that make it, and find your own historical imagination enlivened and excited, and will dig deeper and further. So thank you all for coming. We really appreciate being a part of this.
And before moving forward, I would like to recognize our esteemed board members who are in the House. Mrs. President Sharon Belton Cotman, if she can still be recognized and stand up. President of the board. And also Vice President of the board, Dr. Kathy Evans Brown. She can. And I would be remiss if I did not recognize those who make it possible at Dr. Charles R. Drew School number 59. Principal Hope, if you can please stand. Let's give her a nice warm welcome. And also her assistant principal, Ms. Wallace, if you can please stand. And last but certainly not least, the guardian of equity at Dr. Charles R. Wright School, Ms. Fountain, if you can please stand. Without further ado, and getting down to business, I would like to introduce our esteemed, distinguished guest, Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. Dr. Ibram X. Kendi is a National Book Award-winning and #1 New York Times best-selling author. His books include Anti-Racist Baby, Good Night Racism, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and How to Raise an Anti-Racist. Dr. Kendi is the Andrew W. Mellon Professor in the Humanities at Boston University and the Director of the Boston University Center for Anti-Racist Research. In 2020, Time magazine named Kendi one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Whew! He has also been awarded a 2021 MacArthur Fellowship. We are in for a treat. BARRACOON is the first middle grade offering from Zora Neale Hurston and Ibram X. Kendi. It is adapted for young readers, and you are introduced to the remarkable and true life story of Cujo Lewis, one of the last survivors of the Atlantic human trade. In this adaptation of the internationally best-selling and critically acclaimed BARRACOON by Zora Neale Hurston, one of the amazing literary canons of our time. And so without further ado, we are going to get into conversation with Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, and I welcome him to the stage. Well, Welcome. I'm glad you made it here safely.
It's good to be here. Good morning, everyone.
So we're going to get right into it. BARRACOON is the third book in which you've adapted the works of Zora Neale Hurston for a young audience. Take us back to the beginning. How did the project originate?
So one of my favorite writers is Zora Neale Hurston, and I noticed that many of the people who were writing in her era, who are still famous today, like Langston Hughes. Anybody heard of Langston Hughes, the poet? There's books based on their work that have been created for young people, but there weren't that many books created for young people based on Zora, and so I decided I wanted to do it, and so I reached out to Zora's descendants and asked them, you know, would they be interested in me working with them, and they were down, so here we are.
Wow, amazing. So we're talking about the last known human chattel of the American slave trade. When working on BARRACOON and revisiting Cudjo's story, did anything stand out to you or surprise you, either in his account itself or how Zora Neale Hurston drew it out of him?
So I think one thing that's just funny you'll see in the book is, so Zora goes down to present-day Mobile, Alabama, which is in southern Alabama, to this place called Africa Town, where Cudjo lived. And she wanted to interview him to learn his story. But he wasn't having it on many days. Like, he just didn't want to talk to her. And so on certain days, she would bring him ham, she would bring him crabs, she would bring him peaches. She was bribing him like crazy, you know, to get him to tell her story. And I just thought that's, you know, you'll see that in the text, that it wasn't as if she just showed up and he was like, okay, I'm going to tell you everything. No, she had to, you know, get it out of him. And some days she was talking to him and he was telling his story, and then he was like, you know what, I'm done. Leave me alone. So, you know, he was pushing 90. He was quite cranky. And so I think that was interesting.
Wow. I can only imagine being able to interview someone with that amount of wisdom and experience. We know our elders have so much to offer us, and we should always be listening to them because their stories are so amazing. But for those who aren't already familiar with Zora Neale Hurston's BARRACOON, can you briefly explain what it is and how it came to be?
So I think first, Cudjo Lewis was born in present-day Benin. Benin is near Nigeria in West Africa. And he was raised in his village. And at about 19 years old, people came to his village and kidnapped him, and kidnapped other people in his village and enslaved them, and basically marched them to the coast of West Africa and placed them in a barracoon, which was like a prison, and then eventually forced them onto a ship. And then that ship came over to current-day Mobile, Alabama. And then for about 6 years, he was enslaved. And then in 1865, like other African Americans, he was emancipated. And then him and his compatriots who came over on that ship called the Clotilda were like, we want to go home. Like, we're done with the United States. And so, but they didn't have the money or the ability. They didn't have a boat. And so then they decided to work really hard and save up their money. And then they bought the land that they were on and called it Africa Town. And then not long after, Jim Crow emerged. And Cudjo had to face really another form of slavery in Jim Crow. So that's the sort of the general gist, you know, of the story of Cudjo Lewis. But you'll see in the book a lot of the book is also about Zora's interactions, with Cudjoe, and how she was able to get him to tell his story.
Beautiful. Africa Town is very interesting. Readers will learn about the Africa Town settlement in Alabama from Cudjoe in the book. And you also dedicate the book to Africa Town. Can you speak a bit to its significance at the time and its legacy?
So I think the first aspect of why I dedicated, and I think the legacy of this town, is many of us are taught this idea that it's just like hell over in Africa, that things are bad over there, that people don't want to be there. And certainly we're even taught that African people, that enslaved Africans wanted to come to the United States. Like, people actually circulate that ridiculous idea. And so I think the story of Cudjoe, it makes clear that where he wanted to be, and he wanted to be in Africa. And the fact that he couldn't go back to Africa, the fact that he couldn't go back home, is the reason why he and others created Africa Town. They were like, if I can't go back home, I'm gonna create Africa right here.
Amazing. So we can get rid of these notions that Africa, is just such a horrendous place. I remember as a young child, all we read about in books about Africa, we would see naked people running around, hopping around on trees and things like that. And we were just so brainwashed that this is what Africa was. And then one day I went to South Africa and saw Johannesburg was a major city like California. And it just made me want to know more about why these images and these stereotypes keep being perpetuated on our people. So thank you for that. I'm going to have to research that as well. You wrote this as an adaptation for middle school students. How can this book serve as an introductory text for middle graders learning about slavery and freedom?
I mean, many different ways. I wish that when I first started learning about slavery, and even when I first started learning about African American history, that I was taught and I learned that African American history, that even the enslavement of Africans did not begin in slavery. That there were people who lived and built complex, interesting societies and cultures. And then I also wish I learned that even though chattel slavery was abolished outside of prisons, it transformed, into Jim Crow. So what's fascinating about Cudjoe's story is it doesn't start with slavery and it doesn't end with slavery. And I also wish that I would have learned through somebody's story. There's something about just learning about history through an interesting, fascinating, grumpy old person, right? And certainly Cudjoe was that.
Wow, that's amazing. And reading your book Stamped, I was intrigued by Phyllis Wheatley's story in that same way. And just learning from her story, there were so many things that I didn't know. That's why reading is so important, to know why things are the way they are. So in just one of the many tragedies Cudjoe endured, one of his children is killed by a deputy sheriff, an incident that likely remind readers of countless incidents in current headlines. Are there other moments in the book that you think will speak powerfully to present day readers?
Well, just to add one more detail, and I hate to sort of take this away from you seeing it in the book. Not only did that deputy sheriff kill his child, but later that deputy sheriff became a local pastor at a church, and was a pastor at a church in 1927 when Zora came to interview, Cudjoe. And so talk about no accountability. And of course, that's also representative today, in which you have people who kill and maim and harm black people, and they're lifted up by society. They're defended by society. You know, another example is Cudjoe was hit by a train. Like he was riding home on his horse and was hit by a train. And then he gets a lawyer to help him collect some damages from the train company. So he wins the case.
Wow.
But then the lawyer rolls out with his money.
These injustices just continue to have a long history that are perpetuated over time. And when we look at current day, how people are freed or not held accountable, like in the Trayvon Martin case or in the Sandra Bland case or in other cases, there is a linkage that we can look at all the way back to Jim Crow. So thanks for bringing that up. I'm going to move over now to student questions. Our students have compiled a great array of questions. I know we can't get to them all, but I just want their voices to be elevated in the space. So now I'm going to ask first a few questions from the Our Story Project students that are here and our beautiful students from the Dr. Charles R. Drew as well. So here's one question for you. What inspired you to focus on this particular story? And why did you want to adapt this book for younger audiences?
So there is no, I've been researching African American history, history of black people for a long time. And I can't think of another story, another personal story about somebody who told about how they lived and were born and raised in Africa and then were sort of brought over on the transatlantic slave trade and then enslaved and then faced Jim Crow. Almost all of the other stories, it's about something like even a Frederick Douglass, right, who was enslaved in Maryland and then, of course, found his freedom and then became this abolitionist and then even faced Jim Crow. But he wasn't born in Africa. You know, or someone, and so there are all these other stories, but there's no story that covers so much of the black experience. And so to me, it's a unique story. I don't know of any other story like it that covers so much. And to me, like, you know, young people should be exposed to the best stories.
Wow. This is going to be an amazing read. And we're going to be reading this book and asking you questions, so be ready. We want to make sure you read it.
Uh-oh.
But I definitely like, you know, that idea of you're almost going from one epoch to the next in his life, from prior to slavery to enslavement, then Jim Crowism, and those are almost 2-3 different eras.
There is, and there's no other story that goes through all three.
Wow.
And so that's what makes this story so unique.
Wow. From the Our Story Project, are there parts or characteristics of Cudjoe that you see in yourself?
So Cudjoe is very strong-willed. Like, he just don't play. And so my one of the ways my family jokes on me is that they're like, when you're done, you're like done. Like, so like I'm talking to somebody, I'm like, yeah, I'm done with this conversation. Like, I'm done. And you'll see, like, Cudjoe is the same way. Like, right when he's done talking to Zora, he's like, get out of my house. Like, leave me alone. And there's, like, no shame. And so I think it can be rude at times, certainly. But, yeah, I see that in myself.
Thank you for sharing that. And sometimes we have to be curt, especially with delivering some of the factual information we deliver, you deliver also in your books. People sometimes get a little annoying, so we have to kind of say, just read the book, okay? All right. And who were the people most on your mind as you wrote this book?
So I was actually thinking about two people that I actually never knew, and that was my two grandfathers. So I didn't grow up with grandfathers. My father didn't know his father, and my mother's father died of cancer a few months before I was born. And so I mention that because when I thought about adapting this book, I almost wanted it to read like you were hearing the story from like a grandparent who you really wanted to know, their interesting story. And I never really got that, particularly with my grandfathers. And so I thought a lot about, well, how would my grandfathers sort of told me, their story? I had a grandfather who had to face Jim Crow in Georgia. He actually fled segregationists in Georgia because he refused to bow down to white supremacy. And I would have, I've heard that from other people, but, I would love to hear that, from him. And so I thought a lot about that. And I also thought about his great-grandchildren, his great-granddaughters, who he interacts with in the books, and the adoration and love that he has. There's just something about when an elder loves a young person and that young person loves that elder, yes. and that elder shares with that young person about their lives, and then that young person is able to continue to share about their elders' lives to their children, and sort of those memories of the family continue to get passed on.
And that is why the oral tradition is just so critically important in Black communities, because we're passing on our legacies, our stories, and we need to listen. We need to sit at the knee of our great auntie and aunties and uncles and get those stories, because once those stories are gone, once they're gone, you don't have them anymore. And I wish I would have done that more.
And it's interesting because with my family, like, I have mainly gotten those stories, like, not in a traditional way, like, hey boy, come over here, I'm gonna tell you my story, as much as like they're sitting around drinking and just talking, and so I'm just listening, or we're playing cards and I'm just destroying them at spades, and they're talking all types of trash. Well, when I was younger, I would have beat you. Okay, no, that's not true. But so sometimes it's just, like it's part of what's happening, if you know what I mean. And if we're interested in what they're saying, then we sit there, and listen. But then there are other times we may not be interested, but we also understand the importance, if you know what I mean, of what they're saying.
Absolutely. So I'm going to take one now from the Dr. Charles R. Drew Science Magnet School. They said, what does it take to have your book on the New York Times bestseller list?
Let me just say, for the adult nonfiction list, because I'm more familiar with that than the kids list, it typically takes, you have to sell about 10,000 books in 1 week, just to give you sort of scale. And typically, to get number one, you probably got to do about 20,000 or 25,000 in just 1 week. And the reason why that's daunting is most successful books, particularly books that are published by a trade press, meaning they really want to sell books, if they sell 10,000 books the whole year, that's actually good. And so, you know, people don't buy that many books. Like, it's not like, you know, albums and, you know, films. And so 10,000 is a lot in 1 week.
That's a lot. How many times have you done that?
I have done it 9 times.
That's a lot of books. Woo.
And when you say done it, meaning the number of
How many
books or
times
the
you've
number of
been
time
on the New York, you've had a New York Times best-selling book?
meaning how many times I've been on a list?
On a list.
Oh, I don't know. It's been maybe 100 weeks. I don't know.
100. Wow, let's give another round of applause. Well, with all of those awards you've received, no wonder you're on those lists. From Dr. Charles R. Drew, what inspired your very first book, and what was it?
So my first book was this book called The Black Campus Movement, and it was about when black students in the late 1960s came onto college campuses, and they organized black student unions, or they took over student government associations at HBCUs. And in the late 60s, there was like no such thing as like African American history classes. There were very few black faculty. There were very few black counselors. There was very few black people of any sort of stripe, except, let's say, those who were working in service positions. So these students came in and organized themselves and demanded black studies. They demanded more black students and faculty and administrators. They demanded black cultural centers. They even demanded that universities pledge their commitment to diversity. Yes. They even created diversity offices on college campuses. You know, DEI, or what people are battling over now, largely emerged on college campuses as a result of black student protests. And they didn't just do that in isolation. You had Asian students who were organizing, demanding Asian studies. You had brown students, you had Native students, and they were forming coalitions in some places. And so the book was about what they did, what these 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds did. In certain cases, they not only demanded certain courses be introduced in the curriculum, they literally had to go before a group of faculty this big and basically argue with all of them as to why this course was needed. So can you imagine like a 19-year-old student having to debate with these, quote, world-renowned faculty? In many cases, they won those debates. And so that's what that book was about.
Wow. I've read some of that somewhere. I got to go and find that book too. Just about the movement in the 60s on the campuses with the black movement, the black student union movements and so forth for rights. And I don't know enough, so I'll have to pick up your book. And so how did you start writing? This is from the research, Our Story Project. At what age did you first call yourself an author? Like, how did this all start?
So it's a really sort of long and not simple story, but what I'll say is that was the first book that I published, and I published it largely because, I was a professor. I was actually a professor not far from here at SUNY Oneonta. Anybody heard of Oneonta? So I taught for a few years at Oneonta, SUNY Oneonta. I taught for a few years at SUNY Albany. And so as a professor, as an African-American studies professor, I was required, as part of my job, to write books. Okay. But I think after that book, which was largely written for academics, yes, I decided, why am I going to spend all this time researching, writing, and only a few people read it? So I decided, no, I'm going to start writing books for the general public, for everyone. And so every book since then has been that. But before I was a professor, I was actually interested in being a journalist. But the more I trained to be a journalist, the more I realized how hard it was to determine what I wanted to write. Because there were like editors at newspapers who were like, you're gonna write this, or I'm not gonna publish this. And as a professor, we pretty much choose what we write.
So how old were you when you first called yourself an author? If you don't mind me asking.
So I would probably say when my second book came out, Stamped from the Beginning. And so that came out in 2016. So I was 34 years old.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it can be done at any age, right? It can be done at any age. Did you always know that you were going to be an author? Now, and I know you, and what other careers did you consider?
So I grew up in Queens.
Okay.
Jamaica, Queens, and I, no doubt, and I grew up playing basketball, so I wanted to be, in the NBA. My jumper was pure.
Okay.
I could probably beat any one of y'all in here. No, I'm just playing. And dude was like, all right, take me outside.
Let's go to the gym. Let's go to the gym.
And so, my dream was to play in the NBA, and like many kids growing up, I wasn't able to make it to the league. So then when I went to college, I was like, okay, I can't be in the league, but maybe I can like cover the league, like as a NBA, as a like sportscaster. Like I wanted to be like the person who's like calling the games, when you watch the game and you have the people who are talking about the game. I wanted to be that. But then I was like, you know what, I'm not really that articulate. I grew up in the church, and like my parents are ministers, and so they would bring me to all these churches with like some of the greatest public speakers, and I'm like, I am not that. But I was like, I feel like I could write. Okay. So then I was like, how about I be a sports writer? Mm-hmm. And so then I started doing that. The more I wrote about sports, the more I met professional athletes, the more I was like, they're just like anybody else. Mm-hmm. Like, there's nothing, of course what they do on the court is interesting, but yes. They're just like everybody else. And so it didn't become as interesting as I thought it would. Mm-hmm. But then I also started writing about race and racism and started to see the impact of that writing, which ultimately led me down to the road I'm at now.
Wow, and I'm so happy you went down that road. Aren't we happy you went down that road? Such amazing, brilliant work. Let's go back to Kajo, and I want to say his name right for the first time today. Back to Kajo. Did you travel to any places for your research in writing this book?
I did. And I am planning, actually, we were trying to organize a visit during this book tour to Africa Town. Okay. It didn't work out, but we're actually planning something later in the year. Okay.
And then, did you see any personal growth in yourself, after writing this book?
So, I think if I'm doing something and I'm not growing from it, then it's a problem. And so I certainly had personal growth. I think the way in which I grew probably the most in creating this adaptation was it sort of allowed me to really think deeply about language. So Zora Neale Hurston, after she goes, hangs out with Kajo, records his story, she decides she's not only going to write out his story, but she decided she wanted to write it out in the way he told it. She wanted to write out his Ebonics. And so then she submits her manuscript, I think around 1930, to publishers, and they're like, you better take out that Ebonics. Like, and she was like, no, like, that's his language. That's how he speaks. And so she refused to take out his language. And so as a result, Barracoon was not published in her lifetime. She dies in 1960, and it wasn't published until 2018. And so for me, ensuring that I preserved his language, you're gonna see like the way he speaks, you're gonna be able to hear how he said words. And that was important to me because I know it was important to Cudjoe, I know it was important to Zara, but I also know it's important for us to respect the way African Americans, all African Americans speak, whether it's folks in Buffalo, whether it's folks in Alabama, you know, cats out in Cali have their own way of speaking, you know, and so on and so forth, because too often we have not. Too often we've called the way African Americans speak broken English. And I think it's important for you to know that English as a language came from German and Latin, and we don't call English broken German. So the way African Americans speak came from English, but we remixed it in certain types of ways. And I think we should respect that. And indeed, African people or Black people across North and South America have been doing that. So you have African people or Black people in Cuba who speak Cubano. You have Haitians who speak Haitian Creole.
Right.
You have all these languages that were created by Black people that we should respect, just as people respect the language that Europeans have created.
Absolutely. Let's clap it up for Black dialect, please. I mean, Ebonics is part of our history and our culture, and we need not be ashamed of that. That is art. That is, I can't wait to read this book. I just read a few pages and saw the language, and I said, oh, this is going to be a good one. I cannot wait to be able to honor our languages.
And I just want to, can I just add one other quick thing?
Yeah.
So a lot of, particularly young Black folks, you know, a lot of our language comes from hip hop. And so what's I think it's also important for y'all to know is that there was once this study that was done on all the different musical genres, hip hop, rock and roll, country.
Yes.
And what these researchers found is that hip hop had the most sophisticated vocabulary of any musical genre. And so at the same time, hip hop was creating new words, new languages. It was also using more words in regular English. And people were looking down on it. And people are still looking down on it.
That is really sophisticated, that hip hop, which, you know, is now mainstream, but when it first came out with Kool D Herc and Africa Lambada, it was shunned, right? And now it's mainstreamed and it's so sophisticated in its language and its use, and we don't really understand that. And we know that Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings, in her ethnographic study, she had students, the teachers were using rap music to actually teach standard English. So there's a lot of worth and value to the languages of Black people. We just got to learn how to embrace those. And I think this book is one way that we can actually do that. I'm going to go back over quickly. I'm going to go back quickly to some of the Dr. Charles R. Drew School questions. Here's one. What are your favorite books to read?
What are my favorite books to read? So meaning like what genres or what types of books or, okay, so.
What are your favorite books?
So probably my favorite types of books to read are history books. I mean, obviously I'm an historian.
Right.
but not all history books I like to read, because some of them are just so boring and dry. Just being honest. And so I actually like, history books that are like a narrative. They're like a story. And I think I'm able to sort of follow along, with that story. I mean, part of my job is to read. And so what's interesting is when you talk to my parents, like, about how much I read today, it's funny to them, because, like, when I was in high school and when I was in middle school, like, I didn't read. Like, I didn't read much of anything. For a long time, I sort of looked down on myself, and I was just like, there must have been something wrong with me as to why I was not reading. And, I'd had friends that were. But the more I thought about it and the more I talked to other people about it, the more I realized that part of the reason why I wasn't reading is because the books that people were putting in front of me weren't interesting to me.
Okay.
And I wish that I was exposed to more interesting books. And it wasn't until college when I took this class called, this class in which this professor assigned these books. Of course, I had to read them, but then when I started reading them, I was like, oh man, like, this is, like, it sort of generated my interest in reading. And so I mentioned that particularly for, not just the young people, but obviously the educator in this room. Part of it is our responsibility to try to figure out, like, what is this young person interested in, right? And what book would match their interests. Because chances are there is a book out there, and it's really important for us to help them find it.
Absolutely. For those of you who were here for the Jason Reynolds speech last summer, he said the same thing. He didn't read as a young person, remember? He hated reading. And you've co-authored a book that all the students here are reading right now, Stamp the Remix with Jason Reynolds. And he came to Buffalo and he said the same thing. And it wasn't until he saw the rap lyrics of Queen Latifah and that ignited his reading. Remember that? So this is a very similar. So you can be a brilliant genius like Dr. Kendi and not really know it, but you got to start reading. Yes? Jason Reynolds is also a best-selling author. Many of them know, they've read his quite a few of his books in the Our Story Project program. Yes. Oh, his Spider-Man series, the Marvel series. Some of our young people in the audience have read that book, and they all are currently reading his book, co-authored by Dr. Kendi. So that's amazing. Thank you. How do you handle writer's block? That's from Dr. Charles R. Drew.
So I whenever I get to a point in which I'm at a writer's block, for me, it's an indication that I haven't prepared myself to write. Meaning, the way my process is, before I actually start writing, I do my research, and then I also outline exactly what I want to say. And so typically, if I get to the point in which I'm at a writer's block, I'm like, I haven't thought enough about what I want to say. So I go back and think even more and outline it some more. And then typically, I'm able to push past it.
Beautiful. In alignment with that, from the Dr. Charles R. Drew School, what part of this book did you have an emotionally hard time writing? Was there an emotionally hard time writing any part of Kajol's narrative?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it was the part where he is in his village just enjoying life and his family and his culture, in Africa. And I think the reason why it was difficult for me is because I knew how the story was going to proceed. Like I knew what was coming next, so to speak. And as you know, if you're interacting with someone, it's almost like you're interacting with somebody and you're just joking with somebody who's like on their deathbed, right? And and they know they're about to pass on. And even as you're sitting there like laughing with them and joking with them, you know what is about to happen. So it's just, even in the midst of that joy, it's hard to not think about that pain.
So you talk a little bit about his enslavement piece. So he's having this joyous life with his family and his village, but there's going to be a time when he's going to become kidnapped and enslaved and treated like human cargo. That is painful. That is painful. Yeah, thank you for that. How long did it take you to write BARRACOON?
So writing a book is an on and off again process, and I think collectively it probably took about a year or 2 years. And when I say it's an on and off again process, there was probably multiple drafts. So I had first draft, sent it to the editor. Editor had a whole bunch of edits that I had to go through, edited some more, and it was just sort of constant back and forth. The books that you see typically in libraries or even especially in bookstores, almost all of these books have gone through like 5 or 10 or 15 edits. The best writers are the best editors. Mm-hmm. And so it's hard to really have good writing, on that first write.
Wow. So like 15 revisions of things. You got to take your time with that. You got to take your time. So we have what we call lightning round, okay? So that means that you have to say the first word that comes to your head. You ready? This is from the Our Story Project. Favorite food?
Avocado.
Favorite movie?
I'm biased. Stamped from the beginning on Netflix.
Your go-to song to listen to when you need motivation?
I Ain't Never Scared.
I'm who?
I Ain't Never Scared.
I Ain't Never Scared? By who?
Y'all don't know that?
Who is that by?
Oh my God. Yeah, you know that.
I Ain't Never Scared?
All right.
Oh, who's the author? Okay, look it up, y'all. I got to put it on my playlist. I Ain't Never Scared.
That's going, but don't like put it in if you about to fight somebody, because it's going to hype you up.
Don't do that.
It's going to hype you up too much.
Are you an early bird or a night owl?
Early bird.
Ooh, okay. If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
To be able to give people courage.
Wow. Your favorite place you visited?
Cape Town, South Africa.
Oh, I was there too.
Yeah.
Yes, it is beautiful. Table Mountain. Best advice you've ever received?
So recently, a friend of mine told me that haters are your secret admirers.
Oh, I love it. Let's clap it up. Haters are your secret admirers. Oh, I gotta love that one. Who's the person that inspires you the most?
Since we're talking about Zora, I'll say Zora Neale Hurston.
Oh, that's so amazing. That's beautiful. What brings you joy? And take your time.
The joy of others.
Aw, I'm going to steal your responses. That's so beautiful. And besides Zora Neale Hurston, what authors inspire you?
So Malcolm X, W.B. Du Bois, Nicole Hannah-Jones.
She'll be here next week.
Okay, tell her I said what up.
I sure will.
Yeah, a whole host of writers.
Oh, wow, amazing. W.E.B. Du Bois, The Souls of Black Folk. Who knows about that book? All right, let's clap it up for Nicole Hannah-Jones, W.E.B. Du Bois, Zora Neale Hurston. From Dr. Charles R. Drew, what do you do when you have a new idea in the middle of writing a book?
So it depends on whether that idea is worthy of a book. Because, you know, we have ideas, right? And then some of those ideas aren't really that good the more we think about them. But some of them are like, yo, this is really good. Mm-hmm. So if that idea is for a book that's imminent, like I need to come out with this type of book now, and the book that I'm working on doesn't necessarily need to come out right now, I'll stop that project and work on that new book.
Wow, I would not be able to do that. That's amazing you can do that. It's a skill set. It's a skill set. Well, we've come to our closing. I would just like to first say to you, Dr. Kendi, so blessed, honored, and inspired to be in your presence and to be continuing to read your books. I just want to thank you for the gift of writing and writing from a platform of veracity that you give to us in the Buffalo Public Schools and to the world and to our young people. It's just been an honor being here with you today. And so I just wanted to say that. Thank you to Mr. Chichi and KeyBank, to the Office of CLRI for all of their hard work that they do, to Talking Leaves Bookstore, Mr. Welch. And in closing, I was just wondering, are there any thoughts that you would like to leave with the young people of the Buffalo Public Schools? You have the last word.
What's up, y'all? So I think the last thing I'll say is I want you to know that how I define or determine an intellectual, like somebody who is smart, who is really, really smart, is not based on how much they know. It's based on how much they have a desire to know. And so I just want you to nurture that curiosity, that desire for knowledge, because that, I think, is what's going to carry you through. And that desire to know, to want to know about yourself, to want to know about your world, to want to know about your family, to want to know about why things keep happening to you, why things keep happening to people like you, is what will then allow you to be a part of the struggle, to transform those things, to transform that society. And that's precisely why there are people in positions of power who don't want you to have a desire to know. They want you to be ignorant. They don't want you to know, to want to know, and because they can better control you. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I'm sure y'all have heard the term like knowledge is power, but I think we need to think even more deeply. Like ignorance allows you to be dominated.
Wow.
And that's why knowledge, is power.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give it up for Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. Thank you. Thank you so much. You may be